Just about to start shortly. Okay, so welcome to my park. So I'm just stealing a little bit of Jamie's thunder on this aspect of it. So essentially, looking at the value model. So Jamie's outlined the sort of whole behind the study between the outperformers and the context and the data and the experiences and the knowledge that we can bring from leading practice, and therefore what value we therefore can bring to it. All right, so as part of that, we've got, Jamie has already mentioned these are concepts of the various models that we start to describe. We have 6 types of models: a value model, a revenue model, a service model, a performance model, a cost model, and an operating model. And there are certain contexts by which we would actually use these various models. Okay, and it depends on what the business is trying to do and which ones are more appropriate in which context that they will be appropriate. Okay, so in terms of the value model, it describes the different value perspectives in an organization. So we're looking at the value perspectives. Now, obviously, that's going to be distinct from the cost perspectives. Yeah. A revenue model is looking how it actually brings money into the business by changing or enhancing the value proposition. Yeah. So the value model is the value perspective. The revenue model is looking at the revenue by bringing it in from arising from the value proposition. So you can see there's a relationship in between this. And there's also something called the service model, which is the core differentiating, main and supporting services that are needed. So this takes very much of a service orientation. Now, James has already talked about leading practices and sort of best practices. So best practice, you're as good as everybody else, but you know worse than they are. That's your zero baseline. And then obviously we're moving up into enhancing those into not best practices, but next practices. How do we differentiate? And then ultimately leading practices. In other words, core differentiating, which means that how is your particular business from competitors in your industry and further afield as well. So it takes that very differentiating. So it has this service. We'll go a little bit more about what the anatomy are shortly as well. But in terms of concept of service, so performance model is about defining an organization's ability to perform effectively and efficiently, to determine success or alignment with the value objectives. So this is the metrics in terms of how we're performing and how we're aligning our performance with our stated objectives and how we're trying to align them with the value that we're posing. And of course, as James has also referred to, is the cost model. So the cost model describes all the costs incurred to operate in an organization. So this is focusing, it's adding value or reducing cost, or is it adding value and reducing cost? So what are the costs intended? If we're in a cost-cutting situation, we can start to think, perhaps as James has already mentioned, in the context of the present COVID-19 situation, we're looking at cost-cutting. The businesses had to close. Yeah, the workers are being furloughed in the UK, which means that the government's paying 80% of the salaries. And so where does that leave us in terms of what we're doing? Do we really need to just batten down the hatches and look at minimising costs, or other? So it depends on the context, which is your emphasis on which of the models that we'll refer to. And of course, the operating model, the 6th item of the 6th, is how an organisation is operational, something that Chief Operations Officer might be interested in, how it's operating across its business competencies, functions, process, organisation and technology. So how is it actually working the business and how effectively it's working, and making sure it's harmonising the various business, technology, IT, again, to define the performance and value defined by the organisations. Now, we know that all businesses are in these games and involving all these aspects. All right. But what's the predominant model in a given situation that we'll be using? We'll have a look at the dimensions of that as well. You can see some of the data on the left-hand side where it comes from in terms of the Standard & Poor's SAP 500 volumes and so on. So you can see the source of the work that we engage this with. So let's put those models into the form of a picture. All right, in terms of we're looking at the business model domain, yeah, and we say that within our business model, what are the various models that we would need to refer to, or what combination of the various models would need to refer to. Okay, so let's have a look in terms of, again, an empirical study supporting what models are adopted by underperformers versus outperformers, yeah, and what the emphasis of that going up to the top here. So what's underpinning us here? So let's just have a look at the underperformers. So 39% of underperformers, what are they focusing, folks? The cost model, yeah, watching the costs. Then looking at the operating model, then the performance model, and only after then the revenue model, yeah, the value model, and we can see at the top there the service model. So the performance is making sure that we can keep the lights on, that we, yeah, perhaps being a bit risk, minimizing cost. It depends what sort of sector you're in, why you're doing these as well. But the emphasis for an outperformer is on the value model, yeah, 44%. In terms of the emphasis, so 44 terms of respondents as in terms of the value model, yeah, and then the service model. So we can see the two big guys in here are the value model and the service model. So the service model and the value model, yes, the service model, remember what we've talked about the service model. If we just go back to here, the service model defines an organization's core differentiating main and supporting service as they are delivered. So that's in terms of defining what the service is. So it's going to make to a service orientation. Of course, that helps us, the value perspective, the value model to thrive. Hence why we can see such an emphasis here on the value model with a substantial 29% on the service model. Okay, going up from that, it's just in terms of the emphasis. 12% is on the revenue model, and then we can see cost. We can't do anything regardless of cost. So cost is obviously part of this fabric of an outperformer, and also performance, and of course the operating model. But the operating model is just really in support of the value and the service model and so on, and even for that matter, the cost model and so on. So what's the key findings on the outperformers here? Yeah. So outperformers and underperformers apply different modeling principles to adapt to changes. So they go about things in the different ways. You can see from the chart on the left-hand side. So outperformers are proactive, looking at digital transformation, digital innovation. We'll have a look at what we mean by transformation and innovation shortly as well, to adopt the principles and redesign the business. So the 6 business domains in sequence which look for a target outcome. Okay, so it depends what we're trying to do. Now, this is important. We're focusing on talking about the outperformers here now, focusing on the cost model and the operating model to improve and standardize non-core competencies. Now, can somebody tell me what is a non-core competency? What is a non-core competency? What is a non-core competency? Any ideas?
A competence that doesn't define your core business?
Absolutely, yeah. Because what it is it's what everybody can do. Any business has those attributes. Yeah. So it's not the business that you're not trying to improve. You're not trying to innovate in that area. It's rather centered on, this is stuff that everybody does. We're not making big. If we have a payroll system, it's going to be standard. Certain business processes, it's just everybody does it. We don't need to sort of try and innovate and transform, because it's not what we do. It's non-core competency. Yeah. The second one is in terms of the core competitive competencies. So in terms of the core competitive competencies, yeah, it's something which we're competing on, but it's different from core differentiating. So can anybody tell me what the relationship between a core competitive and a core differentiating concept? You can look at the models that are used to give you a clue. But can somebody, partners to be, can somebody let on them or suggest? And don't worry about giving, it's not a test of how wrong or right, it's just what you think. Yeah, it's not a test. That comes after the training in terms of building up your knowledge. But for now, what do you think is the difference between the two? Any thoughts?
Well, if no one's going to answer, I'll throw something. This is Patrick Guerin. So one of the things that comes to mind, and I saw you use it, blue ocean strategies is a concept I had heard of before that translates really good into this. But yeah, blue ocean strategies, kind of focusing on things that differentiate, would be, those competencies that differentiate you from everybody else, whereas the core competitive would be things that your competitors and you both do.
Exactly. So it is that relation in terms of how you're working in the core, but what makes you distinct? Yeah. What makes you differentiating? What makes your organization yourselves? Any other observations? Somebody else? I
think the last speaker just, hit on the nail. That was just exactly what I was going to say.
Oh, I like it. No, that's good. Yeah. So it's kind of stuff we know, isn't it?
Yeah.
In some ways, it's not a case of this is something that is a revelation. You could almost say, well, it's common sense.
Yeah.
And it aligns with intuition, but it is remarkable nonetheless how easy it is to slip into one of the inappropriate ones and really try and provide performance and service, for example, to non-core competencies and so on. Yeah. So this is absolutely, we need to define it. We need to demonstrate the use case. So the app performance demonstrates those capabilities. And we kind of know this stuff, but what happens in many businesses, it's just like we're focused. We have huge disruptive forces. COVID-19 is a really strong case in point.
Yeah.
That's one example of quite a very serious one, a most serious one. But there are other things that cause us to think, we must focus on costs and we'll focus on the operating model, because we just lose sight of what we know.
Yeah.
So what we provide at Leading Practice is the ability to say, well, look, let's give you an underlying structure. Let's keep you on track for what it is you want to do. If you want a cost model and focus on that, here it is. Here's the use case. Here's the basis on which you would use a cost model. Here's the basis on which you would use a performance model or a service model or a revenue model, value model. So you use this as indeed what we say, reference content that you can refer to and contextualize. So we're looking at this, we're in this COVID situation, we should be cutting costs, but is there, should we also be looking at revenue and service models, even in these times? There are things that have disrupted the landscape, things we couldn't do because, for instance, we have to keep the car plants running, we have to keep the things going, but now those things have stopped. Ideas that we had, even in the most adverse situations, there's some opportunity. And I don't really like to use COVID-19 as an exemplar of that. But in any enterprise, there's an opportunity to think in these novel ways. And the thing is, well, that's all very well, but how do we go about it? So that's where the reference content is. I just want to make sure that everybody understands, because we can just say what models are, we can just say what these mean, what they are, but we need to understand, well, that's all very well, But what do you actually mean by it? Okay, let's move onwards. So let's put these in a little bit of context. Yeah. Hopefully we're familiar with the 6 models. Yeah. As we can see, according to this one, let's put them in a transformation and innovation. Okay, folks. So I'm going to ask you another question. What's the difference between innovation and transformation, or is there no difference at all? What's the difference between innovation and transformation? Again, you could perhaps use the models to give you a clue, but whatever you think it is, it's not a test of you wrong or right. If you say it's completely not what it is, I don't mind. It's more important that you articulate it and convey it. All right? I'm rather relying on people to come forward here, but I'm equally happy to select individuals as well. O'Neill wants to take control.
That's a no. That's a no. I'm sorry, but I could respond. Perhaps one is cause and one is an effect.
Okay, go on. So, what do you mean by cause and effect?
The effect of the innovation would be a transformation.
Okay.
So
all right.
Okay. Can I come in? This is Benjamin.
Hi, Benjamin. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. If you look at the innovation side of things, should we say that this is something that is between you and your competitors? What your competitors are doing, what you can use in order to stay ahead of the competition? And then if you look at the transformation as a company, you revolve. So as we are using COVID-19 as a case study, what in terms of your core competencies, what can we do in order to stay in business, or probably, if I should use the word, to metaphor ourselves to always continue to grow?
Okay, very good. Any other points of view?
Hey, Simon, this is Mark.
Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
It's Mark Miller from As-If Securities. I've always looked at it as transformation as something that you do to increase something that you're already doing within the company with core competencies or those things that you're trying to differentiate yourself with from somebody else. Whereas the innovation is something that propels you above everybody else because nobody else is doing it. You're the first one to market with something like that.
Yeah. And that's how we interpret it, because everybody who contributed, everybody had value. The way we look at transformation has just been last articulated there by Mark Miller. And that was in terms of transformation is something that you're doing now, but you're doing it better. Yeah. So you're trying to transfer. So a business transformation is doing what you're already doing, but doing it in a better way. Yeah. So performance, cost, operating. Yeah. Whereas innovation is doing something new. Transformation is doing something that you do already, but you're doing it better. It's the same thing, but you're doing it better, more efficiently, more effectively. And then from that, you're increasing performance, reducing cost, or optimizing your operating model. You're doing the same thing, but you're doing it better than you were. So for instance, you're reducing cost, you're improving risk. That can transform into things like better customer services. They are all part of transformations, but that sort of thing. But you're still doing it. Whereas innovation is doing something new, doing something that's completely new. So innovating, value model, service model, and revenue model. So in the same way, let's just take an older example of Apple moving into the mobile or the cell phone market with the iPhone, for instance, against established market players. So that was a disruptive influence on the market. That had an impact, and that shows innovation. What's innovation was? Well, we're good at what we do. Yeah. We're giving the customers already a great experience. The Apple ecosystem, the sort of experience that you get with that, we're doing it better. Our business processes reflect the kind of the way we work, and that improves the customer experience. But innovating is saying, well, we're going into something, doing something that's completely new. So if we think about COVID-19, which was brought up by a couple of guys here, what innovation exists about doing something new? But in a very simple sense, transformation is doing something that you're doing now better. The same thing, better. Innovation is doing something that is new. So I'm just quickly scanning the scan. So yeah, that's pretty much got it there, Samir, as well. Okay, so we can apply the innovation principles to the goal chain, value drivers, and scorecards. Now, if you look at the diagram on the left-hand side, then what you're seeing is how you can appropriate the relevant models to transformation and innovation. Now, at the moment, they're just circles on a screen with some arrows coming out of this big circle in the middle called the business model domain. We've contextualized it to transformation and innovation. What we need is, okay, you've told me, now show me. How do we actually start to do that? How do we, in other words, focus on the innovation culture, think out of the box with exploration? Transformation, it's not that transformation is bad and innovation is good. It's all good. Transformation, it's all good. So transformation and innovation. But this is just an example, and I won't labour the point because I know I'm conscious we need to move on to keep the pace, is that when we use terms at Leading Practice, we use them in defined ways. That's not to say that we exclude. So there were some very good comments about the value add between transformation and innovation. Absolutely invaluable. I think that was O'Neill that said that. Was in terms of that they are still relevant. They're still relevant. What we do is we can relate and apply terminology to that effect. But what we do is, this is part of our standardization. It's as simple as this, to get to the point. It's a way that we can use terms to define. If we clear our understanding, then we can build upon it. All right, let's move on. But I've opted choice for discussion later, and no doubt clarity is needed. So let's have a look at that in terms of financial outperformers, because to get to where to make these claims, there's got to be some evidential base for it. Now, so business relevance, repeatable patterns, IT relevance that we define in here. So let's put this in a matrix to have a look at it. So core differentiating, the so-called 5%, it's analogy to we as human beings are mainly made out of water. Is it 60% or 70%, whatever the magic statistic is? But we're mainly made out of water. Without water, we can't survive. But my H2O is the same as your H2O. We all need H2O to live, but it's the same thing. And it's the same thing. So if that's what you've said, that's really in sort of non-core competencies. So core differentiate. So that's the big figure. So most of enterprises are identical, whether they're science, whatever industry, because they have this common H2O or common water, if you like. So that's why you're seeing that magical figure of 5%. Okay, just to really not absolutely bang on 5% and not 4.99 or 5.01, but in terms of the relationship, we're looking at the 5%, and that's where you need to focus the core differentiating activity on. So focus on innovation, going back to the relevant models, value experiences, creating new markets, demands, and partnerships. So the goal is competitive advantage for your industry, even people who are exactly the same industry as you. What's your core different? What makes you different? Yeah. And then, of course, there's the magic 15%. Yeah. So the 5-15 is a 20%. People sometimes refer to the so-called Pareto analysis. We can do 80% of the stuff with 20% of the effort. So we can keep the water watered and that side of it of 20%. So we put the energy into these top 5 and 15% that's on here. So here, core competitive parity. We want to keep up with our competitors. We want to focus on transformation and efficiency. We want to be better, in terms of how we do business. That gives us, the customer, a better experience, but we're offering this, ultimately, we may be offering the same thing. We might be optimizing the way in which we handle our costs. We might be optimizing the way of our business processes. We might set a culture of how we organise risk. We transform maybe the mindset, a more positive outlook from employees referred to as partners or colleagues rather than members of staff. Yeah, it's about transforming the enterprise. Yeah, to make it better, to make it to efficiency. So here we can see that the service and performance models come into play in here as to value, and of course the non-core. Yeah, to meet the market standard, we're really in trouble if we just can't even keep up with the flow. We're not doing anything that's differentiating. We might be using standard procedures, standard software packages, standard models, but at least to make sure we're at more. So we still need best practices at non-core because we want to make sure that the stuff that we're doing that's non-core, at least we're doing it well. Yeah, so focusing transformations and obviously around the standardization of the operating model in terms of the business relevance. Now let's push this guy out to the right now and see what comes out. So here come the leading practices. Okay, as we go through the leading practices. So we're talking about practices identified, focus on the revenue model, the value model, and the service model for innovation. Okay, so we hypothesize that these are the structures we use, but it's based on study of the financial performance that shows this is the way they work. And we got the empirics from the previous slide when I showed you the bar chart earlier on between underperformers and outperformers. So again, the leading practices. The industry practices identified by the service model, performance model, and operating. What is the gold standard of industry performance for that industry? What's considered amongst your peers? And we might say we might not have any competitors, but in some sense, even if we're in government, or there are competitors. There's still factors we can do better. Like Jamie, I teach at a university. That's one of my roles, and in that role, we are competing. As a university body, we share common practices, best practices that we do for the industry. What's the other universities doing? How can we share experience? How can we learn from each other? But at the end of the day, a student has a choice where he or she wants to go. She's going to come to Sheffield, or she's going to go to, I don't know, Derby, or maybe abroad, Paris or somewhere, notwithstanding COVID, but in the normal cycle of things, people have choices. So what's an attractive value proposition of coming to here? We could say, in our case, Sheffield Hallam, that we actually teach a lot of leading practice stuff. And that the students experience that's in a way we're corporate differentiating, we're being innovative. We're doing something that to us is new. Liaising with leading practice and building that capability. So we differentiate ourselves from competitors, even though we follow the best practice in the industry practices for what constitutes good research, teaching, and so on. All right. So the non-core is on the operating model standard. We have a human resources department. We have a set of processes. We have legal compliant things we have to do. We want to do them. We have to pay our taxes. We have to make sure we calculate, the financial models and all that sort of stuff. Those are best practices. We want to do those in the best practice way. And notwithstanding the various sizes of the enterprises, you're going to see those sort of structures exhibited in all enterprises with slightly different emphasis. We know that there's numerous building business models, but there are the greatest similarities than there are differences. Okay, let's push on then. So in terms of tailored IT systems, so let's just review. We looked at the business relevance in the first column. Repeatable patterns, what can we reuse and reuse? It is suitable for us to still refer to leading and still use that, looking at the revenue model, the value model, and the third key. Make sure the business and the IT work together. Productivity creativity. Human creativity includes business, because enterprises are constructs. The last time I looked at a company, or should be run by human beings, yeah. We should say, because I'm one too. We all business intelligence, using AI, machine learning, all the stuff that's kicking around at the moment, yeah, cloud technologies, how that stuff can help us to be more creative and fulfill our business needs. So how do we tailor it? That is pivotal in leading practice. You may recall from the periodic table for leading practice I showed you earlier, I didn't emphasize it then because I wanted to make the general point, but what you would have noticed, and I will say it again, is you'll see business, information and technology as part of those layers. So how can we bring those together, and how can we diversify the technology components between business users? It's not about constraint. Obviously, there's things like legal constraints and all that kind of stuff. It's not that that goes away, but it's constraints only where needed. We don't want standardization to get in the way of core differentiating in that sense. Okay. So tailored information, this is your business. This is just for you. Yeah. Industry information systems, in-specific customizations, requirement management, business transformation, best practice. We don't have to reinvent stuff that's already used for industry, for core competitive anyway. What's the best practices industry? How they're going about it? I've just used for the sake of argument and for our academic colleagues as well. What are the contexts of how we can better, what's best practices in teaching and delivery? How do we deal COVID-19 with a move to online delivery as opposed to face-to-face? What's the best, that's specific to what sort of information we use? Okay, should we use Zoom? Should we use Teams? Should we use something else? Collaborate, Moodle, technologies, cloud solutions. These all come into play. What's the student experience? What's the best practices? And then we can tailor it specifically to what we do for our particular needs that reflect our IT, that reflects what we want to be doing as an individual. And of course, standard systems, out-of-the-box technology, no need to customizing it. We don't need to go through our whole organization and model every single business process. What is the point? Yeah, we remember that if we're doing things like that, we are taking energy out of other aspects of the business because all resources are finite. Yeah. People say we've got to model all the business processes. Well, you only need to think about that for core competitive or particularly core differentiating. The other stuff is just out of the box. You turn the handle, it works. It does the job. Unless there's issues with it, then we don't need to involve in customization. And we can standardize across the business unit. The trick is here with standard systems, they don't get in the way. The standard systems do not get in the way of core competitive and core differentiating. Yeah. Okay, just getting some notes that the sound is being a little bit clear. All right. But do bear in mind, folks, that we are recording this as well. So you have the opportunity to visit it as well. But yeah, thanks, Mark and Ines and others that notices issues in the sound. I normally get an alert on here that says when there's an issue, but that's clear it's not happened. But thank you for them. I hope the sound is okay. So it's much better now. Patrick's saying it's much better now. Thank you. All right, so let's move on then. And obviously value and cost on the right hand side. So what is an outperformer? Let's just at least summarize what we see in terms of an outperformer. It understands and sees innovation and transformation as separate and interconnected domains, that support the business. We understand what innovation and transformation and the appropriate model support it. It cannot settle for incremental improvement. We must innovate. Things happen. We experience that now. But in any event, innovation is part of the fabric of business. For us to stay ahead. Okay, so our forms do something different. So you can that pushes us toward. It's not just a unique product at a moment of time. It's an innovating transformation, interlink from strategy design to strategy execution. Strategy comes out of recognition of the environment we're in, where we want to be in the marketplace, what's our strategy, and then how do we actually deliver on it? Strategy inclusion. So Jamie's already referred to this already, so the concept of an integrated strategy life cycle. Again, to say, and just to show, so this is part of what we're going to call a framework. So our framework is, one of the frameworks is the strategy life cycle, and we can see here change management, but continuous strategy improvement. So we can see the degree of change is high, medium, and low. So in here, we're finding our feet, we're thinking lots of change early and often. Obviously, by the time we get here, we're in much more of an operational environment. And of course, significant change at that point is far more risky and far more costly than if we trap it. There's an idea from design thinking, which is called fail early and often, from design thinking. Fail early and often. Explore those ideas when you're at the initial part of the life cycle. All right, so what you see in front of you is that framework, which here, this example is the strategy life cycle, yeah, with the degrees of change, and the techniques that we use in this one is fit gap. But here are specifically the methods, yeah, that we can use. Now, these icons become significant on here because each of these icons, these symbols, represents one of those 91 meta objects. All right, I covered that this morning, and I cover it again this afternoon. Remember, I showed you the periodic table with 91 guys in there, 91 boxes, meta objects. They have one. So we align, everything we do aligns to those 91 and those relations in between them. So that's just worth taking that thought as we go over into lunch and come back in the afternoon, at least at UK time. So we have specific methods, align drivers, design enterprise strategy, determine organization groups, assemble, identify the roles, put into the actions the roles, and so on. And obviously we can go through specific, but folks, if you look down here, can you see the letters that appear here? We have an appropriate model at the bottom here that aligns with it as well. Okay, so there are ones that we can rely, and we've got one or two others in there that we can, such a process model, for example. Okay, let's move on. So the conclusions from the financial outperformers: identify the discipline of market analysts. Financial outperformers proactively, or any outperformers, okay, perform proactively, research and understand the emerging trends and disruptive forces, that they're aware and cognizant of the environment, identify the right strategy options and design. This is where we got the models from. This came out of our findings. Understand, differentiate, core differentiating, core competent, non-core. There we go. Stuff that we know. More effective strategy execution on the core, or more effective developing core differentiating core competencies. So we got some stats, 87% more. Transformation, innovation, effectiveness and efficiency. So do bear in mind, when we talk about transformation, transformation is doing something that you're doing now, but you're doing it better. Innovation is doing something that is new. Crack the code on strategy execution, how we actually get strategy execution from strategy design. Remember, we can go back and refer to the framework. Within the framework, we can refer to the associated method. So we describe what is a framework and what is a method. We actually use that language to be clear and unambiguous about what we're describing. And of course, innovation versus transformation, are the correct understanding. Yeah. So we've distilled that from this study, and you can see that's the study. So that's it, folks, for this presentation. So as I say, I finished that off. We've just come to the lunch break that we're at. So I will, so thank you very much. I'll stop sharing my screen. Okay.
Hey, Simon, this is Ken.
Hello, Ken.
Hey, do you want, when you take the break, do you want everybody to stay connected and just mute their microphones and turn off their cameras? Or do you want people to dial off and then dial back in?
The way it works is this, that you can leave the meeting, and when you want to join the meeting, you just click on the link again. So you don't need to hang around. If you want to free up your computer from the background noise, you can.
Right. Okay.
So you can
Great
disconnect and
presentation,
reconnect. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So we'll come to we've got to lunch. We'll stick to the schedule. We've got some interactivity in my part of it. We'll pick up at 2. If you've got any questions beginning at 2 o'clock, we'll take those, and then we'll move on to the next section. Okay, folks. So back in 1 hour's time.
Thank you very much for that presentation, Simon. It was excellent. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Pleasure. Okay, I'm going to hang up and I'll be back in 1 hour. Thank you.